Hello, I'm your host, Tom Parker, and welcome to the very first OpsCast episode, where I'll be joined by guests from across the DevOps, reliability, MLOps communities, anything ops related, and who will be sharing a snapshot into the challenges they're facing and providing some hints and tips to the community on how they're tackling these. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Alex Glenn, who heads up SRE over at Domino Data Lab. Alex, an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time out. No, it's great to have you here. I'll ask you just to give a bit of an intro to yourself and to Domino, if that's okay.
Yep, thanks for having me again. So I'm Alex Glenn. I'm a site reliability engineering manager at Domino Data Lab, who are really their mission purpose is to provide data scientists the ability to deploy their models in a unified, collaborative and governed way at scale so that the businesses that they work for can get real value, and it makes the data scientist's life easier to do that. My background is very much in the ops space. So I've previously worked in infrastructure management, automation, site reliability engineering and cloud solutions. That's my background, and that's a bit about Domino.
Nice. And I think with obviously what you guys are doing, and Domino with all of the hype around AI at the moment and the growth in that space, it's a really relevant point to be discussing today, and some of those challenges that you're finding and what you're tackling there. So we'll jump into the questions and start moving on from there. So the first question, and hopefully a pretty relevant one as we discussed, is what's the toughest technical challenge you're facing at the moment? And we'll come on to how you're going about kind of digging into those.
So the one thing I'm going to say around this is one of the toughest challenges isn't necessarily a technical one. I think we spoke a bit about this before when we spoke offline. It very much revolves around processes and tooling and kind of making those accessible and consumable for users. So that's like whether it's our internal engineering team, who might be like our end users, or fundamentally our end customers. It's very much about providing a balance of like operational capabilities and the tooling that they want to use and the processes that they consume them, but in a way that they can consume them in a kind of like easy, fundamental way. So if we take like our engineering teams who we support, for example, they have very complex jobs where they have their own sets of tooling, their own sets of processes they have to follow. And in order to get them, to be able to consume the toolings that SREs have expertise in, or that maybe, platform apps have those capabilities in, they can't be experts across everything. They need to focus on what they need to focus on, which is like value add to the product and for the business. So we need to take things, upstream tools like Terraform or whatever that may be that we have expertise in, and make those consumable for the developers. They maybe touch tools and processes like this once every 6 months. They have to do a whole back step and try and understand how it's working again. They kind of don't want to have to keep going through that process, and the more streamlined we can make it for them to consume that, to make their day-to-day lives easier. So like I say, whether it's spinning up the environments that they need to do their development work using infrastructure as code tools, just providing them a simple mechanism to be able to consume that. Or again, if we look like digging a bit deeper into the actual site reliability side, like metrics are a complex thing. Deploying metrics that are consumable and aren't going to break the system and make it probably less reliable when the purpose is to make them more reliable is a varying challenge. And as site reliability engineers, we have the expertise in that space. So what we want to do is build the tools and capabilities that make it easier for our developers to be able to interact with those and understand how they're doing things in the right way. So whether that's doing things like, I don't know, creating tooling that validates that when they push their code as part of CI, it ensures the metrics genuinely exist in the product. So like if they're creating a new dashboard that's consumable by our customer or by our internal ops teams. All the dashboards they create in, do they have the right metrics that actually exist?
Yeah.
Do the alerts consume the metrics that they exist? And are those metrics going to fundamentally break anything? Do they have like crazy cardinality that's going to blow up the system? And just validating things like that. Like we want to go and teach the engineers these processes and how these things work, and how the development work they do might break something if they don't do it in the right way. But I guess it's a trust but verify approach. So we want to give them the training, give them the capabilities, trust that they're going to do the right thing, but then verify through actual tooling that's going to give them a bit of a checkbox to say, yeah, it's working as I want it to work.
Yeah, absolutely. How have you found that it doesn't have to be a Domino, but in general, that buy-in from those consuming what you're building? As you said, that's more a cultural point than maybe it is a technical point.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and maybe this might touch on some of the other questions that we're going to answer in a little bit, but I think the biggest thing is if you can get buy-in from your customers, and whether that's an internal customer or whether that's an external customer, that's kind of the easiest way to get buy-in from like the rest of the org. So if you're talking like, should we be doing this from like a budgetary, is it like important point of view? If you can go and speak to your actual customers or speak to your internal customers and say like, do you need this? Is this going to help your day-to-day life? If the feedback is yes, that's the way I kind of find the easiest way to get buy-in across the board, I think.
Just having that communication piece across the teams.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
nice. And we've seen teams set up in different ways where either the teams are separately siloed, which does create some disparity in that communication, or actually say SRE is embedded within an engineering group, and then you have that kind of close-knit community within those teams.
Yeah, and I don't always think they're like mutually exclusive. I've worked in organizations, including Domino, where we do a combination of both. We potentially have an SRE team, and then within that we might have embedded SREs that either stay permanently with an engineering team, or maybe we act more in like a consulting role, right? So we might embed them with a particular engineering team for 2-3 months, and they can go and like teach them the tools that we're building, get the buy-in that they're interested in consuming these, make them able to consume them, give them the skills that they need to do it, and then they can disappear, come back into the fold of the rest of SRE, or go out to other engineering teams. So I think it's quite a useful exercise to do, almost act as like a consulting business internally.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And we're kind of touching on that, but what key lesson from everything we've discussed there can you take away and that you share as kind of one point to the community?
Yeah, so I think the real like lesson that I think I've learned over time is just understand who your actual customer is, and understand what makes their lives easier and what they need, and make sure you're building something that they want to consume. We can all disappear and build something, but if you've got no one to use it at the end of the day, it's a bit pointless. And in understanding the customer, kind of have a understanding of like empathy towards what they've got to do as well. I touched a bit on the developer side earlier. They've got really important and really complex jobs where they have to do lots of things that are like giving business value. And if then you're asking them to go and write really complex Terraform or figure out all this metric stuff on themselves, that's like another thing that's going to take their cycles away from being able to add the business value in their code. So like, what helps them? And the same for anything. I'm a big believer in all teams are product teams. Like as a site reliability engineering lead, I want to make the team like a product team. I don't want to be just firefighting incidents all the time. That's not what anyone really enjoys doing. At least I don't think they do. So yeah, building out products for your customers, but the importance of that is understanding A, who your customers are, and B, what their needs are. So it might be an internal engineering team, it might be a genuine end customer, or it might be, your support or those kind of functions, building out the process and tooling and make their lives easier. If your support teams have the tools and capabilities to stop things getting into engineering, if things do go awry, that's saving you time and effort, and it's saving your engineers time and effort as well. So anyone can be a customer. I just figure out who that is and make sure you're building the right things for them.
Actually, it's going to add some value to them rather than what you're doing as a whole.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you. This is really general rather than the points we've discussed on there, but what one piece of advice would you give to other ops teams out there in the community?
Yeah, so again, I keep touching on this kind of theme throughout, but my advice is like probably digging in a bit more specifically, maybe like try and embrace the principle of like configuration as data for your end users, especially in like an SRE world or a platform ops world where your end consumers are generally pretty capable. They know the stuff, but like, and they can interact with the things that you provide with them, but the easier you can make it for them, the better that is. So, like we have configuration as code tools, but if you're asking your developers to go and write their own Terraform, that gets really complex. Why don't, as a team, you develop a method for those to interact with that Terraform code just by providing data to it? So I want an AWS environment that's X, Y, and Z to be able to test out on my code. Instead of them writing the actual code to do that, just provide them a mechanism to say what they want in words and fundamentally provide them that value. That's taking complexity away from them. It's making their lives easier, making their value add quicker. They don't have to go and drop and do something for a week just to stand up like a default environment. And the same for anything. Again, I try and like push it along to different things. So if you're asking teams to create their own dashboards and alert for their services, make it easy in a way that they can do that at scale. Give them the tooling that allows them to input that data as like an export JSON file that then you can scale across as many thousand deployments as you want to do, building the tooling that you've built as an ops team. Again, get feedback throughout. Make sure you're speaking to them. These are the consumers. These are your customers. Get that. Just make that feedback loop tight. But yeah, just make it as easy as possible for your customer to do their job, I think is the best way.
Absolutely. And do you, just general view out there from teams you've worked in or that you've seen or that you interact with externally, do you think that kind of attitude and mindset is prevalent across teams, or is it a point that you see needing some transition?
It tends to vary, and I think it depends on where you are on your quote unquote transformational type journey. So, and depending on how big your org is and how complex your processes are, it's easier in certain places than others. I think there's a shift to it, and I think that shift is because there are many teams or there are embedded people now who fundamentally have to do all this day in, day out. And it does just make lives easier. So yeah, I think there's still work to be done. But across most of the orgs that I've worked with, but I do think it's heading the right direction. I think that the aim is to get there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I think again that's coming from more being like, I think a lot of engineering teams now are being more customer focused, and I think that's what's driving the shift. Whether it's internal or whether it's external, like I see more and more engineers interacting with their customers and get the feedback of what they're producing, and that feedback loop kind of makes that life easier because that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly with general market at the moment, how things been over the last kind of year, 18 months or so, particularly across, say, SaaS services, etc., where that value add to customers is so relevant and so important at the moment that everything teams can be doing to maximize that, whether you're a dev, whether you're an SRE. I think there's been more top-down push on it from what I'm seeing out there. It's really interesting to hear you talk about that. Awesome. On to the next question. So again, this is a pretty broad one. If you could rebuild your stack from scratch, what would you do differently?
The power of hindsight is always a great thing. It's bit of a tricky one. I'll probably answer it more broadly, I guess, than try and be like, I'd rip this out and change that specifically. And it's always hard, anywhere you go, unless you are startup day one, everywhere you go is going to have their own legacy tech stack. I mean, that legacy tech stack's probably getting slightly newer nowadays. Like, your legacy tech stack is hopefully something a bit more like new than like a whole bunch of old Solaris boxes in a server room somewhere. But you never know. But I just try my best to use like there's a big push at the minute, especially in like the open source community, for better standardization and better tooling that leads to that standardization. That started with things like Prometheus and Kubernetes and Docker, and being able to do things in a more standardized format. So I try and build all tooling the best I could to consume that and make it easier for people to do. Things like the open telemetry collector, which is coming out now, that makes metrics like much more easy to consume and shift around and relay to different sources. That's a tool that looks really interesting. And again, it's just a push towards standardization that makes life a lot easier, and removing that barrier of entry quite often to, I probably think of it like, I'm still thinking in the world of like, my end consumer typically ends up being like developers, and I want to make their lives easier. But like, if they don't have to worry about the metric side of things because it's built into a tool that makes it really easy for them to like do that bit, and they no longer have to bake it into code and figure all that stuff out, that's great. Similar to like what Istio and like service meshes started to do, developers no longer needed to write all like their networking capabilities into the code base themselves. It abstracts it. It makes it easier for someone to just consume it. In an ideal world, I'd build out everything trying to consume those toolings and processes that standardize it.
That's it. I think it's always going to be an evolving process anyway, isn't it? With, as you talked about, new technologies coming out in certain areas, particularly the speed they're moving at the moment. So that makes a lot of sense.
I guess on the flip side, the danger is to go towards the shiny new things and all about standardization. And these tools might be standardizing things today, and that could change in 6 months' time. So I'd just be wary of new tech stacks. I do my due diligence and make sure like the repositories are doing well, they're incubating in the cloud native foundation, etc. Just make sure that they're probably going to be adopted by the community rather than something that's maybe going to be a bit of a fad.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to your earlier point where there's got to be value in what you're doing and what you're using, and there's got to be a reason for that, as opposed to doing it because you want to do it and because it's great for you to go and play around with that kind of tech. Yeah,
exactly. That's always a danger in, I think, the world of technology. And people are attracted to shiny things. People typically tend to be, magpies and want to go over that and then latest stuff. But it's just about, like you say, making sure that it's going to give you value. It's not just something that looks neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. This is moving slightly away from kind of the tech culture discussion that we've been having, but somebody coming into the reliability, the ops space, whether they're joining as a grad or just moving into the industry from a different role, what advice would you give somebody coming into the industry at this point?
I try and put a big focus, and we keep touching on this with like making sure you speak to customers. Like, I just say soft skills and interpersonal skills and trying to understand business value in what you're doing is really important, and especially for someone new in the business. Like, just because you don't have a particular skill set in a certain tech, like I wouldn't let that put you off. Like, the tech's easy to learn in comparison to like being able to go out and speak to an end customer and understand what they're trying to do and then turn that into like something that you can actually create for them to consume. People put a big focus, and you see it all the time, probably you more than anyone, being on LinkedIn and in the recruitment space, complaining about like technical tests and how all this stuff goes through, and I think there's a lot of pressure on that, and my advice would just be, obviously make sure you're getting the tech skills, that they are important, but what gives you real value as an engineer is being able to correlate that to something that's of value to a business.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with what I've seen probably over the last 5-10 years or so. It is maybe a shift away from some of that technical knowledge, particularly in the space that we're talking about, because it's so broad, and you're just not going to be able to know everything when you're doing a tech test or you're doing a shared screen exercise, whatever that looks like. And I would say more people now that I work with, if they are rejected through processes, it's probably the cultural side. And filling in, having that communications piece, at least it's as important, where it probably wasn't a few years back. And maybe that's slightly different in core development roles than it is in our space. But I particularly think here it's so important. So yeah, I totally agree, that holds true.
Yeah. It's always a difficult balance to get. And like you mentioned, like, that doesn't take it away from people who might be a bit more introverted and want to just go and focus on the tech stuff. Like, if you're a brilliant engineer, that's not going to kind of hinder you. But I just see from my personal experience, and like, I spent a lot of time in consulting and going around lots of businesses, and the people who progress pretty far in their careers tend to be the ones that are not always the most technical, but have a good technical acumen and can express that across the board.
Absolutely. Awesome. And a bit of fun just to finish things off. This will probably raise some eyebrows depending on what your answers are throughout the episodes, but your most loved and your most loathed tech currently?
It's probably no surprise that I'm going to have to say Domino's AI platform, surely, since I work there. But no, it's genuinely a great platform, and it's a great platform because it basically solves all the problems that we've been talking about through this, but I think it solves them in an even better way. I've talked a lot about improving developers' lives, and developers are pretty IT savvy. They're capable in the IT world. If you can write really complex, like Go or Python or C or whatever it is, you can go and figure out how to spin up an AWS environment using like Terraform. And I don't want to take this away from data scientists, because I'm sure they probably have those capabilities too if they go and focus that they're insanely intelligent people who give real value across the board, whether that's like new medicines being invented that are solving like big problems. I don't want to take it away from them, but they're probably further removed from the IT world. If you go and ask a data scientist what Terraform is and how to stand up an AWS environment, they're probably not really going to consume that. They come from a world where they just write really complex code, typically on their old machines, and then how you get that to a server involves many different people and trying to understand things that they probably don't have to want to think about. And Domino basically removes all that complexity for them. It gives them a platform where they can do the value add work that they want to do and not have to worry about all the nitty gritty bits of like IT systems that go around it, as well as giving them like capabilities to make sure they're doing it in a governed way that's scalable, etc. So Domino is a great product. Whether I worked there or not, one of the reasons I went to work at Domino was because I thought the product was amazing. It solved a lot of the things that I thought was giving value not only to the data scientists but to the world. If I had to choose a tooling outside of that ecosystem of Domino and maybe go back to like the reliability engineering side, I touched on it a bit earlier. Like, I think the open telemetry stuff's good, not just because it's new and shiny, but because I'm a big believer of like abstraction and standardization for things that are pretty complex. So that's
absolutely. And everything that you're saying about Domino, obviously a vested interest there, but what I'm hearing from data scientists and the whole MLOps piece, that's where some of the huge challenges of actually getting these models into production and delivering what they do, you can see the value there. And obviously the team are doing some pretty sexy stuff at the moment and out in the community as well. So anybody listening should definitely go check Domino out and see what the team are up to. Nice. And on the other side, with risk of offending anybody out there, most low tech at the moment?
I'm going to be a bit bureaucratic. I'm gonna avoid naming any particular tech. I think. I'm sure with the IBM purchase. I keep seeing people moaning about Terraform, but from experience of working at organizations that have worked with IBM, I wouldn't dig too much into that. I think Terraform's still a great product and heavily used. I think the like loath tech again, and it's not a specific tech, it's more about maybe using tech in the wrong way, or maybe over engineering something where you really don't need to. Like, I've seen a lot of people go and basically rewrite Ansible or rewrite Terraform and write really complex pieces of Python to stand up an AWS environment. And not only like, these aren't like software businesses either, where like their business value is like creating software for people. These are like enterprise FSIs where their value is like money and banking. And why would you go and write your own software that you can pick off the shelf, not even paid for, like free, like open source, works perfectly, has thousands of contributions, if not millions, by the community that you can just consume. So yeah, I wouldn't say a particular tech, but I would just say I see that a lot. And I have seen that a lot in my career, and I think it's a pretty bad practice to go down. You know, use open source. It's really useful tooling out there. Use enterprise software when you need to. I'm going to obviously push enterprise software as well. Domino is an enterprise platform, and these big enterprises need enterprise things for various reasons, security, etc. But when there isn't a need for that, if you can do something to make it simple and make it easier to do, that fundamentally costs you less money and speeds up your time to deliver.
Yeah, and again, that comes straight back to the conversation at the start of the podcast with do what's valuable rather than necessarily doing it for the sake of it. Yeah, really insightful and very diplomatic. We'll see if others are as diplomatic. Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really, really insightful. I'm sure there's a huge amount there that viewers and listeners can take away in a short, sharp kind of soundbite. I hope it's been valuable to everybody out there listening. Any questions, any comments, then I'll be around. Chuck them in the comments below. And obviously we look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Alex, thank you again. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.